Good afternoon, and welcome to the webinar on entrepreneurship in Nebraska. The webinar is presented by the Bureau of Business Research, which is a unit of the Department of Economics and part of the College of Business Administration here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. My name is Eric Thompson. I'm the Director of the Bureau of Business Research, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to present our webinar to you today. We're going to be going through a PowerPoint presentation, lasts about 15 to 20 minutes. Talking about trends in entrepreneurship in Nebraska. Before we get started, I want to point out a few other features of our webinar for you. If you look to the right, you'll see that we have a chat window where you can chat with other participants during the webinar as we go along. You can see that there's also a list of people who are participating in the webinar, so if you see any names that you recognize, you can send them a quick note or ask questions during the webinar through our chat window. Also in the chat window, this is in the lower right-hand side of your screen, you can see that we have a registration link for our upcoming December webinar, which will cover the new Nebraska economic forecast for 2017 as well as 2018 and 2019. A few other features to note. In the bottom middle part of your screen, we have a question and answer window where at any point during this webinar you can type in a question or you can wait till the end of the PowerPoint presentation and type in a question. We'll be answering all those questions at the end of the PowerPoint presentation. Lastly, I note that we have some poll questions. We're going to poll webinar participants on 3 questions over the course of the webinar. You can see the first question in the window in the upper center part of your screen, and a little bit later we'll be asking that question as we work our way through the PowerPoint presentation. So with all those things pointed out, I'm going to go ahead and proceed with our PowerPoint presentation on entrepreneurship in Nebraska. Here's an outline of the PowerPoint presentation. We're going to talk about the measures of entrepreneurship that we use. We're going to let you know what we found for 2015 in terms of the relative strength of entrepreneurship here in Nebraska versus the United States as a whole. Lastly, we're going to talk about some potential public policies for enhancing entrepreneurship in Nebraska, or indeed any state. So let's go ahead and get started talking about those measures of entrepreneurship that we'll use today. These 5 measures of entrepreneurship were initially developed in a book that I co-authored with Dr. William Wallstad, also of our Department of Economics, called Entrepreneurship in Nebraska: Conditions, Attitudes, and Actions, which was published in the Gallup Press back in 2008. Here are our 5 measures. We're going to look at the percent growth in employer establishments, so the annual increase in the total number of establishment businesses with employees in the state of Nebraska. We'll also look at percent growth in employer establishments per person. We'll look at the business formation rate, number of business births per person in Nebraska and the U.S. We'll look at patents per 1,000 persons to try to get the idea of technology innovation and that type of entrepreneurship. And lastly, we'll look at average income per non-farm proprietor. Are the businesses, the entrepreneurial businesses in the state, high-income businesses? So we'll look into that in a little more detail in a minute. Let's look at that first measure, percent growth of employer establishments. The key thing to point here is we're measuring the total number of businesses and how it changes from year to year. This will reflect both business births, how many people in a state started a business during the year, but it'll also reflect business deaths, how many of the businesses in the state closed. And then births minus deaths will be how much the total number of businesses increased during the year. So it reflects both births and deaths. Our data source for that is the quarterly census of employment and wages from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and that's basically based on the unemployment insurance program that all or nearly all businesses need to participate in. So it's very broad coverage of the number of employer establishments. And that leads us to our first poll question. So you can see it there on the screen, also the window in the middle upper part of your screen. Where will growth in employer establishments be faster during 2015, the most recently completed year? Will it be faster in Nebraska than the United States, faster in the United States than Nebraska, or will the growth rates be about the same? So where will the number of businesses be growing more quickly? We'll get to that answer in a minute. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit more about our 5 measures of entrepreneurship. The second one is the percent growth in employer establishments per person. The reason we also have this measure is because, as we know, states grow for a variety of reasons. One of the main reasons some states grow faster is they have a very successful entrepreneurial climate in their state, creating a lot of new businesses and jobs. But states can grow for other reasons as well. For example, the state of Florida tends to grow rapidly because it's a retirement destination or just a place people want to move due to the moderate climate and good weather. So Florida then, just because it has faster population growth, is also going to have somewhat faster business formation as well, and growth in employer establishments, because you're going to need more businesses to serve the larger population. So it's useful to have a per capita measure of employer establishments so that we can kind of make an apples and apples comparison to your rapidly growing retirement states like Florida, your moderately growing states like Nebraska, or perhaps some of your slower growing states in the Northeast and Upper Midwest. So percent growth in employer establishments per person. Again, we're using the quarterly Census of Employment and Wages data on establishment counts, and then also we get some population data from the U.S. Bureau of Census. Our third measure is the business formation rate. So again, this does not reflect this. It purely focuses on the number of new businesses being formed in a state per capita, basically the rate of your residents in a state that are forming new businesses each year. This is actually typically the most common measure of entrepreneurship that you see in various studies gauging the level of entrepreneurship in different places in the U.S. We definitely wanted to include it in our list of 5 measures, although we wanted to have a little bit more robust list that also included other factors such as business deaths, how high income were the various businesses that were being formed in a state. But we definitely include the business formation rate as well. This also comes from the U.S. Department of Labor, its Business Employment and Dynamics database. Our fourth measure, patents per 1,000 persons. So obviously a major emphasis in entrepreneurship is in commercializing new technologies, starting high technology businesses in a state, often one of the goals that a state has for entrepreneurship. So a great way to capture that is by measuring the patent activity in a state. So how many patents are being produced each year per 1,000 persons in a state? It reflects activity in entrepreneurial activity in technology-oriented industries. This data is from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and of course we get the population data from the census. Our last measure is average income per non-farm proprietor. It's the ratio of non-farm proprietor income to the number of farm proprietors. Obviously, Nebraska also benefits from having a lot of successful farm proprietors, but this measure focuses on non-farm activity. And basically, it just tells you what type of entrepreneurial businesses do you have in your state. Some states might have a lot of proprietorships, but a lot of those are in industries that are not very profitable, or a lot of them are part-time hobby-type businesses. On the other hand, if your state has a high average income for non-farm proprietor, it suggests that those entrepreneurial businesses are full-time and also in industries that are more profitable. This data is from the U.S. Department of Commerce, its Regional Economic Information System. So those are our 5 measures. Well, it's time then to let you know what our findings were, and we'll be able to answer our first poll question. Where will the growth in employer establishments be faster, Nebraska, the United States, or will it be about the same in the 2? Well, it turns out that in 2015, the number of employer establishments was actually growing faster in the United States than in Nebraska. About 1.7%. That's actually a really strong rate of growth nationally compared to 0.7% in Nebraska. We had decent growth in our state, but quite rapid growth nationally. You can see it's not always like this. Nebraska's not always behind. We actually looked 5 years ago in 2010. Now that was a recession year, so the numbers are a little lower across the board. You can see that Nebraska performed actually slightly better than the U.S. in that year. So it's not every year, but in 2015, the United States grew a little quicker in terms of employer establishments. This allows us then to ask our second question, our second poll question. So you can see it's up there now. Three of the four remaining measures that we've talked about are the business formation rate, patents per 1,000 persons, and average income per non-farm proprietor. And the poll question is, which of those three measures will be strongest during the year 2015? So go ahead and make your vote, and we'll see the answer to this poll question revealed over the next few minutes. Let's get back now to our second measure of entrepreneurial activity, which was the growth in the number of business employer establishments per person. You can see the results here. And what you see in 2015 is there was no growth in employer establishments per person in Nebraska because our population growth rate was 0.7, the same as our growth in employer establishments. So no expansion in the per capita employer establishments in Nebraska in 2015, but there was pretty rapid expansion in the U.S. during that year. Now, why do I think the U.S. is doing so much better? I think part of it is because Nebraska's economy recovered more quickly from the Great Recession, but the U.S. economy is still bouncing back, recovering, and during recovery, you do usually tend to have a larger formation rate for business. So I think that's part of the reason that we're a little behind the U.S. this year. You can see it's not always the case. Again, back in 2010, during the Great Recession, both the U.S. and Nebraska were actually losing businesses on a per capita basis. Anyway, this is a second measure then where the U.S. is doing a little better than Nebraska. Let's move on to the next three. These are our findings for the business formation rate. And as you can see, Nebraska is doing actually a little better than the U.S. in 2015. That's no fluke. We were pretty close to the U.S. in 2010 as well. Now, this is kind of interesting to compare this rate with the rate we saw for employer establishments. It suggests that in 2015, at least, Nebraska is keeping up or actually slightly exceeding the U.S. in the share of people forming new businesses. But our business death rate appears to be a little higher this year, or back in 2015, than it was nationwide. Let's look at our fourth measure, patents per 1,000 persons. What were the findings there? Well, the numbers, you can see the numbers there. Nebraska clearly lags the U.S., and it wasn't just in 2015. It's actually year after year, including back in 2010. How do you interpret these numbers? Well, if you think about 100,000 people, what these results say that in 2015, for every 100,000 Nebraskans, there would have been 16.5 patents issued during the year. Nationally, per 100,000 people, there would have been 43.9 patents on average issued. So patent activity in Nebraska is about 1/3 of the U.S. patent activity rate. That was true back in 2010 as well. And it suggests that while Nebraska, as we've seen, there's evidence that Nebraska is a pretty entrepreneurial state, does lag a little bit behind in technology-oriented entrepreneurship. Let's go to our fifth measure now, and this is really the good news. Findings for the average income for non-farm proprietor. And as you can see, Nebraska is regularly ahead of the U.S. on this measure. Again, this is non-farm proprietorship, so it's not just that our farm economy has a lot of successful farm owners. This is the non-farm sector. And you can see in both 2010 and more importantly here in 2015, Nebraska is well ahead of the nation in terms of average income, suggesting that our entrepreneurs in Nebraska tend to be in more profitable industries and also are more likely to be full-time rather than part-time business owners. So this is the entrepreneurial businesses we have are creating more income and wealth here in Nebraska. So I guess that also answers our second poll question, which is which measure will be the strongest for Nebraska in 2015? And the webinar participants correctly estimated that it would be the average income per non-farm proprietor. Okay, so let's summarize our results. The strongest measure of entrepreneurship for Nebraska is average income per non-farm proprietor. We are tending to have higher income proprietor businesses. Nebraska led the nation in 2 of the 5 measures, the business formation rate and the average income per non-farm proprietor, but we lagged the nation in 3 measures, growth in employer establishments, as well as growth in employer establishments per capita, and patents per 1,000 persons. So Nebraska in 2015 did about average for the U.S., perhaps a little below average, but right around average, leading in 2 of the 5, lagging in 3 of the 5. Now, that may be a little bit discouraging, but please remember that the United States is still a highly entrepreneurial nation, and if we're an average state in a highly entrepreneurial nation, then that makes Nebraska a pretty entrepreneurial place too. Okay, let's go on to our third topic in the webinar, which is what can we do to enhance entrepreneurship here in Nebraska, or any state for that matter. And before we start with that, let's go ahead and ask our third poll question. What is the best way to enhance entrepreneurship in Nebraska? Is it to improve the business climate by working on taxes and regulations? Is it to enhance the entrepreneurial ecosystem, the resources and expertise available to entrepreneurs in our state? Or is it to enhance entrepreneurship education at the secondary and post-secondary level? Well, let's go ahead and talk about these issues a little bit more. Again, these are the 3 main approaches: entrepreneurial education, entrepreneurial ecosystems, and improving the business climate for entrepreneurs. Enhancing entrepreneurship education, that's actually many of the high schools and colleges, community colleges in our state are very active at this already, offering individual courses in entrepreneurship, offering degrees in entrepreneurship, offering minors in entrepreneurship, so that people studying in all sorts of subjects have some training in how to start a business. It's not just business school students that need entrepreneurial training. Engineers, artists, people in communications, in all sorts of majors, people have opportunities to start businesses and can have access to entrepreneurial education many places in our state. So we're making a great effort here. Entrepreneurial education also can be very important in business transitions, whether it's an heir taking over the business or employee or some brand new person to the organization. When businesses transition, as the owners are retiring, entrepreneurial education can be very important in that as well. Second is enhancing entrepreneurship in Nebraska through enhancing the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So technology transfer, many of the, certainly the University of Nebraska, but other universities in the state do have established programs for transferring technology, new knowledge to entrepreneurs who can commercialize it and start businesses. We also have an active and growing angel investor program in Nebraska. It can be really helpful. People just not only do they provide early stage financing, but they provide a lot of expertise in entrepreneurship to help young entrepreneurial companies. There's also an entrepreneurial endowment in the state to make funds available to early stage entrepreneurs, such as the Invest Nebraska program. So we have a lot of things going on, but we could do more in each one of these areas to build our entrepreneurial ecosystem. A fourth thing, maybe gets talked about a little less, but is just as important, is sort of the professional support for entrepreneurs. So accounting, real estate, legal, marketing services, other consulting services. Established businesses use these type of services and often hire professional firms to provide them quite regularly. It's part of the operating costs of business. But young entrepreneurial firms also need this type of support. And in states with a well-established entrepreneurial ecosystem, what you find is there's a lot of accounting firms, real estate businesses, legal firms, marketing firms, and other consultants who've got a lot of experience and expertise at meeting the needs of young entrepreneurial companies. So there's that expertise is present in Nebraska as well, but if we could build it up further, I think that would do a lot for our entrepreneurial ecosystem. For example, most of these professions listed there have annual accreditation and training requirements. Perhaps some of those training requirements could focus on working with small entrepreneurial businesses. Anyway, there's a lot of opportunities in developing the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Last is the business climate. So can we reduce regulation? There's a lot of licensing requirements in some occupations and businesses here in Nebraska. Perhaps some of that could be rolled back a little bit, other regulations. Entrepreneurs need access to health care that's reasonably affordable. Obviously, tax reductions can be helpful to entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs take large risks to start new businesses. Part of the reason for that is often the potential for financial reward. If you can keep more of that financial reward, it creates more of an incentive for entrepreneurship. And quality of life is also very important. A lot of entrepreneurs have options on where they'd like to live. If your state has a high quality of life, that can help you attract and retain entrepreneurs. I guess this third poll question, we can get to the answer now, was kind of a trick question. There wasn't a right answer, which of the three is the best way, but there's a lot of opportunity in any of those directions. And I see that our participants in this webinar are focused on improving the business climate and improving the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Well, thank you. Those were the main points I wanted to make today. We can check to see if there's any questions that members of the audience would like to ask. Before we wrap up the webinar, I'd be happy to answer any of those. And I'll see if anyone types a question. In the meantime, let me just again remind you of our next webinar, the Nebraska Economic Outlook, which is coming on December 9th, 2016. You can still click on the registration link in our chat room. And then also, please follow us on social media. I see we have a few questions now. Be happy to answer those. Are the slides available? Yes, the slides will, I believe, be emailed to each of the webinar participants, so we'll get those to you. Thank you for asking. And I appreciate the comment. Yes, we're happy to provide this information to you. Again, thank you for participating in the webinar. You can see again how to follow the Bureau of Business Research on social media, or you can email our email address bbr@unl.edu and subscribe to our newsletter, which you'll be sent via email each month. Thank you again for your time. We appreciate the opportunity to present to you and look forward to presenting to you again in December or whenever you have a chance to join our monthly webinar series again.